In my opinion, the Administrator was one of the most intriguing characters to come out of the first two DLCs for the first Evil Within game. He was a shadowy, slenderman-esc character that tormented Kidman throughout the course of her journey inside of STEM. However, in the Evil Within 2, his addition to the game has always just seemed like more of an afterthought or a forced inclusion so as to tie up Kidman's storyline, in my opinion. I don't feel like his death in the second game really did justice to the character, or even Mobius as a corporation in general. It makes me see them less as menacing, and more as incompetent. So let me start by saying, outside of the orchestration of these things, Mobius has failed at pretty much everything that we know they ever did. The Administrator, and by extension Mobius, forced Marcelo Jimenez to bring Ruvik into the STEM project officially, even after Marcelo told them that he was unstable. Then, when Ruvik did something unstable, and made it so the system would only work with his brainwave patterns, Mobius had him killed and his brain stuffed into a jar to power the machine. Which is pretty much the reason that the events of the first game happened in the way that they did. Which leads us to the second game, where Mobius sets up their own version of STEM. In this version, they don't screen their applicants very well, and they can't enforce their own employees. Myra was let into the organization, despite them having to know that she held a grudge against them. Kidman, whom we know they had very high hopes for, betrayed them, and they couldn't even keep Theodore Wallace under their thumb.
Give me the power of the core.
Why does everyone want to control Union? It's not even real.
Union is better than reality. Union is Mobius. Their minds are connected to it. To control Union is to control them. To control them is to control the world.
If you think I'm gonna help an asshole like you take over assholes like them, you're even crazier than you look.
All of this just makes the organization seem incompetent to me, especially when we're told so often about how much power they supposedly have in the world, that they can basically do anything that they want without any repercussions. Yet, despite all of their power and ability, we never have any true clashes with them in these games. Kidman fights the Administrator in the DLCs, sure, but from what I can gather, that wasn't even the real Administrator. If I had to guess, it was a mental representation that Kidman created to embody the organization's influence over her. So the most we are ever challenged by them is when Kidman fights a few of the security guards at the end of the Evil Within 2.
All security personnel.
Need to hurry before more show up. Shit!
Get away! That is pretty much why I think the Administrator was wasted. Because he had so much power, and yet nothing ever came of it. He died just like everyone else in the organization when their brain chip was tampered with. Which, to me, is just an underwhelming conclusion to the build-up that he and the organization had had up to that point. Even still, though, I think I can kind of see why they couldn't really make him a boss or something of that nature. For one thing, we already fought a version of him in the Kidman DLCs, so to fight him again, even if it's the true him, may seem like a retread of the same ground. For another, lore-wise, this game doesn't take place in the real world. It takes place in the STEM system, and given how dangerous it is to go into the system, there's no perceivable reason that the Administrator would ever go in and risk his death. All that being said, however, I wish something more would have been done with this character. I really enjoyed his ominous presence in the Kidman DLCs, so to see what became of him in the second game was always just sort of a letdown for me. Although, as I stated, I can kind of see why it played out in the way that it did. It's also entirely possible that he's not actually dead after all. We never get to inspect the body or anything of that nature, and you would assume that his mind chip would be different from his subordinates, so it's possible that he survived the ordeal, however unlikely after the scene that we're given. Regardless though, he's still an interesting and intimidating presence, even if his legacy doesn't quite hold up that well in my opinion.
You failed. you an order and you failed.
No. None of this is real. You aren't real.
You want to believe that, but I'm right here. I've been with you this whole time.
This world is a nightmare. But I'm not afraid of you anymore.
That just shows how little you understand. You should be very afraid. We have you, kid. And you know the consequences for failure. We won't let you just leave us.